Let's be honest, our planet's coral reefs are in deep, deep trouble. Decades of threats have all piled up into this huge crisis, and scientists are literally racing against the clock. But there's a new field of science that's fighting back with some absolutely incredible techniques. So today, we're asking a really critical question. Can we actually rebuild a coral reef? And maybe more importantly, is it enough? First, I just want you to look at this number, 84%. That is the staggering percentage of the world's coral reefs that were hit by the last global bleaching event. It is the biggest one in history, and it left these once vibrant, colorful cities of the sea looking like ghost town. But just as we're trying to wrap our heads around the scale of that bleaching, a new and honestly a much scarier threat has shown up. It's a devastating plague, and it's tearing through the Caribbean like nothing we've ever seen before.
People call it stony coral tissue loss disease, or SCTLD for short. It popped up in Florida back in 2014, and now it's just everywhere in the Caribbean, and it is absolutely relentless. See, unlike other diseases, this one attacks a huge range of corals. We're talking over 20 different species, and it kills with terrifying speed. You can have these massive, centuries-old coral colonies, the bedrock of the reef, totally wiped out in a single month. It's just gone.
So yeah, the situation is grim. No way around that. But in the face of this crisis, people are stepping up. And this has given rise to this really hopeful and really urgent new field, active coral restoration. We're not just watching anymore. We're intervening directly to try and save what we have left. So what does active restoration even mean? Well, to put it simply, it's about giving a damaged ecosystem a direct helping hand. The best way to think about it is like gardening, but for the ocean. Scientists and conservationists are literally taking little pieces of healthy coral, growing them in nurseries, and then planting them back onto dying reefs to try and bring them back to life. Now, as you can probably guess, this whole idea has its critics. Some people say it's just a distraction from the real, giant problem, which is climate change. I mean, what's the point of planting coral if the water's just going to get too hot and kill it all over again? It's a fair question. But the proponents, they have a really powerful argument. They say restoration preserves crucial genetic biodiversity. And most importantly, it can buy time for the reefs while we, hopefully, get our act together on the bigger climate issue. Okay, so if you're going to garden the ocean, what's in the toolbox? Well, the methods scientists are using are getting more and more innovative, and it's pretty amazing stuff. The techniques range from the pretty straightforward, like taking a piece of coral and moving it, to the super complex, like building whole artificial reefs. But there are a couple of these techniques in particular, microfragmentation and larval enhancement, that are just total game changers. Okay, you have to hear about microfragmentation, because this is just incredible. Scientists take those big, slow-growing boulder corals, these are the ancient architects of the reef, and they use a diamond saw to cut them into these tiny little 1-centimeter fragments. They grow these little pieces in a nursery, but here is where the magic happens. When they plant them back on the reef close to each other, the fragments recognize each other as basically being the same individual, and they fuse together. They literally reskin the old dead coral skeleton, creating a huge, healthy colony in just a few years, a process that would normally take nature decades or even centuries. Then there's larval enhancement. This strategy is all about playing the numbers game. You see, during spawning events, corals release millions of eggs and sperm into the water. But very, very few of those baby corals actually survive. So with this method, scientists collect those gametes, raise the little baby corals in protected tanks, and then release them right onto the reef, which massively increases their chances of making it. I know, these techniques sound amazing, and they are. They're genuinely hopeful. But, and this is a big but, we have to face a difficult reality. The passion is there, the innovation is there, but the science is telling us there are some really sobering challenges, especially when it comes to scale and, long-term success. A huge review looked at 362 different restoration projects, and it found a really critical weakness. The median amount of time these projects are monitored for is just 12 months, 1 year. That's nowhere near long enough to know if the restoration actually worked or if it was just a temporary, feel-good success story. And this right here is that exact problem in action. There was a project in Indonesia that after 3 years was called a massive success. Coral cover was up, fish were coming back, everything looked great. But just 6 months after the study officially ended, a bleaching event rolled in and killed nearly all of the corals they had planted.
If they had stopped monitoring at that 3-year mark, we would have a completely false and dangerous picture of success.
And then you have the problem of scale. 100 square meters. That's the median size of a coral restoration project. To give you some perspective, that's about half a tennis court. So while these projects are incredibly valuable and important, they're just a tiny drop in a vast, sick ocean. Figuring out how to scale this up to restore entire coastlines, well, that's a monumental challenge.
And that leads to another big problem. A lot of the time, we're not even measuring the right things. That same big review found that while almost every project measures if the little coral fragments they planted survived, nearly half of the projects that claimed their goal was to restore the whole ecosystem function never actually measured it. They weren't checking if the fish came back or if the reef was really becoming a living, breathing ecosystem again.
And that failure to look at the whole ecosystem is a massive blind spot. Because a reef, it's so much more than just a pile of corals. The death of a single coral colony can send shockwaves through the entire community, affecting countless other creatures in ways we're only just starting to figure out.
So let's really dig into that question. Why does the fate of one kind of coral matter so much to the whole reef? Well, to answer that, I want to introduce you to a tiny but incredibly important resident of the reef.
Meet the cleaner goby. These little guys are basically the doctors and dentists of the reef. They set up these cleaning stations on big, healthy corals, and other, bigger fish will literally line up to let the gobies nibble away parasites and dead skin. They're what we call a keystone species. Their impact on the health of the entire community is way bigger than their tiny size would suggest.
Okay, and here is where it all links back to that awful disease we talked about earlier. Research in the U.S. Virgin Islands found that the number of cleaner gobies is 50% lower in areas where that stony coral tissue loss disease is widespread. 50%. Half of them have just vanished.
And the reason why is simple and it's tragic. As the disease kills the big corals they use for their cleaning stations, their offices basically, the gobies have nowhere to set up shop. They're forced to move, their cleaning becomes less effective, and pretty soon the health of the entire fish community starts to decline. The loss of coral leads directly to a sicker reef for everyone.
So, where does all of this leave us? We've got these brilliant, hopeful techniques on one hand, but on the other, they're facing these enormous challenges of scale, of monitoring, and of the ecosystem collapsing around them. It's time to put restoration in its proper place.
And I really want to read this quote directly from the authors of that big review because it's pretty much the most important takeaway from this whole thing. They say, "We highlight that it is critical to not view restoration as a replacement for meaningful action on climate change." So let's be crystal clear. Coral restoration is not a silver bullet. It is an absolutely vital, necessary, and often heroic effort that buys us precious time and saves species from going extinct forever. But it's still a local treatment for a global sickness. It cannot, by itself, outrun the relentless pressure of a warming and acidifying ocean.
And that leaves us with one final and pretty heavy question. All this incredible science, all this hard work and dedication, it's all aimed at buying our reefs a little more time. The question for all of us is, what are we going to do with the time that they have bought us?